There's an old poem that starts something like, if you can keep your head whilst all around are losing theirs, is something that came to my mind when I heard the news about Sam Bankman-Fried's erstwhile company, FTX, earlier this week. You see, the liquidator has announced he's going to be making payouts earlier next year, and I'll get to that in a minute. But if you remember, Sam Bankman-Fried was heavily into his tokens. The disaster that was FTT, his own proprietary token, was certainly a major part of his downfall, but he was into other tokens too, amongst them Solana, of which he'd said he'd buy as many as he possibly could at, I think, $3 a share. Now, the price of Solana tanked just after the downfall of FTX, as investors in that and many other tokens ran for the hills. But had you bought Solana just after the FTX debacle, you could have picked them up at the price of around about $10 a token. At the time of writing this, the Solana token is currently worth $250. That's easy math, a 25 times return. As a comparison, the S&P 500 has gone from about 3,800 at that time to 6,000 at the time of recording this. So that's approximately 1.6 times return. At least in his belief in Sol, you'd have to say Sam Bankman-Fried was right. And Sam Bankman-Fried was right in one other instance as well. And I'll explain that in a bit. So let's get to the news about what the receivers have just told us, and then I'll explain that last comment as well. So if you remember, after the liquidity crisis that befell FTX, the current chief restructuring officer, John Ray III, took over the company and the estate and started to collect assets and generally investigate the financial affairs of the group. At the time, there was talk of an $8 billion black hole, which had gone to shore up losses in one of Sam Bankman-Fried's other companies, Alameda Research, that was run by his erstwhile romantic interest, Caroline Ellison. And as a result of the bankruptcy procedures, Sam Bankman-Fried was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Now, he's appealing those, but he's in prison whilst he's doing so. Gary Wang and Caroline Ellison received lighter sentences in exchange for their cooperation. Now, Caroline Ellison actually is in jail at the moment, but former co-founder Gary Wang was actually sentenced to time served, so he walked out of the courtroom free. When I say free, that's 3 years of supervised release and a fine of around $11 billion. So, he'll be busy trying to pay that off, I guess. What's with the bankruptcy then? So what we understand is the bankruptcy team under the leadership of Ray III have managed to collect around $16 billion, which is intended to be distributed to creditors of the FTX estate. Just a side note here, I know there's been a secondary market in the buying and selling of ex-FTX debts. If you have been someone who's lost out, then there is a deadline to complete your claim and register it with the liquidators, else you could lose out. Not much time left. So we don't have all the facts and figures on the bankruptcy yet. When the Chapter 11 filing is made early next year and the claims are paid out later in March, or that's the plan at the moment, we'll no doubt find out more. What we have heard is that the amount that the bankruptcy team has collected is enough to pay 118 cents on the dollar to 98% of creditors who hold $50,000 or less in claims. That to me is quite remarkable given the dire position we all thought FTX and Alameda were in at the time of the liquidation. There are some questions, though, I would raise, and they really surround what we don't know. So first of all, 98% of creditors holding $50,000 or less in claims, I guess, are what you call the smaller investors in the grand scheme of this type of company. But the other 2% could represent by value a huge number. So what is the dilution to that 118 cents on the dollar when you take into account the other 2%? We don't know. Also, it's unusual for creditors to be paid out more than they're owed, and any excess normally goes back to the equity holders. Strangely enough, that could mean that Sam Bankman-Fried himself and Gary Wang, as the former founders of FTX and obviously shareholders, could be due something back in the return. I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, but if they did get something back, it would help pay their fines, I guess. One of the things that I know has helped the bankruptcy team a lot has been the recent bull run in the crypto market, where the assets that they've collected have gone up significantly. It's very unclear whether a creditor will get back the value of their cryptocurrency as at today versus the value it was back in 2022. I'm sure the relevant creditors would rather have their Solana back than the cash value it had in November 2022, don't you think? What has been reported, however, is that most of the crypto was actually sold. It's gone. 99% of the actual crypto holdings on the FTX exchange were gone. And it's the assets in FTX's equity holdings that have been sold and have raised the majority of the funds. For example, it had a stake in AI startup Anthropic, which it sold for nearly $1 billion, or rather the bankruptcy team sold it for nearly $1 billion. Another question I have is that the bankruptcy team are dealing with Chapter 11, and that would apply, I think, only to FTX US. So there are hundreds of companies around the world in the group, and what is the status of all of the others? That is a very big open question I've got. So we might be talking a good news story about part of the group, and who knows what about the rest of the group at the moment. Other news? Well, it was bound to happen. A movie is being written about Sam Bankman-Fried, and it's based on the author of The Big Short, Michael Lewis's book, Going Infinite, and the movie is going to be called Going Infinite, The Rise and Fall of a New Tycoon. At least that's its working title. Any guesses on who might be playing Sam Bankman-Fried? I've no idea. Let me know if you've got any good ideas. I'll pass them on. I'll give the last word to Sam Bankman-Fried, who just after the implosion of FTX said there was enough money for everyone to get repaid back. Well, he was right. He was dead right. Well, in my personal opinion, I think that whilst he's right, it was kind of despite him, not because of him. So that's the update on FTX to date. Bye for now.